I want to start immediately by thanking our guests for tonight, Lara and Russ, who will be introduced by Jordan in a moment. I want to welcome all the new guests to our session, and of course our alumni and current students. I'm Ed Hoffman. I'm faculty with Columbia University School of Professional Studies and for the Information and Knowledge Strategy program. And tonight is a informal proseminar, a discussion connecting our students and community with leaders who are really at the core of helping us create, or helping really the world create, the future of work. And we'll be looking at that and discussing that tonight. So it's an evening with ServiceNow, the future of work. I'm looking forward to it, hearing what they're doing in terms of the current environment and technology and customers and the changes that are going on. And then towards the second half, we'll open it up to questions. So I would suggest keep some of your thoughts down. Use the chat that's in the Zoom area to write questions, and we'll collect those, and we'll move forward. So let me turn it over to my colleague, Jordon Sims. Many of the students in this class know Jordan, who worked with me to design the Navigating the Future of Work class that we held earlier this year. Jordan is the founding partner at Imperium, a successful global advisor to organizations, and he's also faculty at the Information and Knowledge Strategy program. So Jordan, I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce the guest that we have for tonight.
Awesome. Thanks, Ed. Appreciate it. And welcome, everybody. It's great to see so many familiar faces from those that have gone through the Future of Work program that Ed and I have put together. And your feedback's been great, and we're continuing to poke and prod at it and make it even better, because as we all know, there is no static future of work, and we're constantly looking at what this looks like going forward. And welcome to our guests that are coming to potentially check out the program and get more involved with Columbia. So glad you could join us. We have two really good guests with us tonight, and one of the design basis and reasons behind pulling folks in like this is because our goal is to make this as interactive as possible. For those that have been a part of the course and those that are guests to us for us tonight, we've put a strong focus that Ed and I have been emphasizing, and I'm sure most of you have probably heard it a million times now. I'm putting the focus on the people, right? So we have no shortage of tools and technology out there. We have no shortage of innovation, and it's so easy for leaders in these organizations to get distracted and wrapped around the axle on the tools and tech that they're constantly chasing and trying to keep up with. The innovation pressures, the pressures to innovate at scale, the pressure to keep up with competitors and things of that nature. And the one thing that typically gets overlooked are the intangibles that actually drive the value in the organization. And so we've put a heavy emphasis on those intangibles, and I thought it'd be really helpful to bring in some good friends and clients even of my own. So I joked before you all joined as to how many of my bosses I could put on one screen here. What could go wrong for me in one night, right? So please be kind and gentle. I'd like to walk away from this one if possible, Brett. So but I wanted to do is make this as interactive as possible, and not just as we often provide insight and academic research around organizations that are approaching this differently. I thought it'd be helpful to actually bring in leaders from an organization that is actually doing it differently, that actually has a culture around people, around culture, around collaboration, trust, how knowledge and ideas flow, how speed to market from a decision-making standpoint, and how you coalesce people around an idea and make it happen quickly, and how that translates into them keeping up with innovation, strategies, disruption around that, and ultimately how that translates into their product on how it's changing whole organizations working. So I'm pretty excited about that. We have Lara Caimi from the ServiceNow leadership team, Chief Strategy Officer, has a strong background in professional services herself, previously from Bain, and strong business strategy focus, coming into ServiceNow and the technology industry in Silicon Valley. And we have Russ Elmer, General Counsel for ServiceNow, who in his past life is been heavily involved primarily in the fintech industry, and has been around technology in a variety of forms, and is a recovering lawyer. So we won't hold that against you, Russ. So that being said, Laura, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself real quick, and we'll hear from Russ real quick?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. It's nice to see all your faces, and it's funny in a Zoom world where you're seeing all the tiles. It's like you have to scroll over to see how big your room is here. It's weird, but very pleased to be here tonight. Like Jordan said, I'm Lara Caimi. I've been at the company now for 2.5 years. I was at Bain and Company for over a span of 17 years, where I worked largely in our technology practice in the Bay Area, working for big tech companies who can afford big transformation strategy projects. And every once in a while, I'd get to work on like a private equity backed billion-dollar software company, and it was like so amazing to be at a smaller place that was not like the Titanic to move. And so I came over to ServiceNow under the previous CEO, John Donahoe's leadership, building the strategy function, and expanded that over time to other areas. And now, of course, work for Bill McDermott, one of the most iconic, I think, software executives in the industry today. And I'm learning a ton. And part of my remit is to work with the management team and the board, thinking about our future and charting our path and where we're going to take the company. And so we cross over the $4 billion run rate this year, and we have our eyes set to $10 billion in the near future, which we're really excited about. So it's been really fun to be in the right industry at the right time. It feels like you sort of like when in Rome, where in enterprise software seems to be the place to be. And certainly I feel like we're having a real impact with our customers, and we're having a lot of fun doing it. So that's me.
Perfect. Russ, do you want to give us a quick rundown on?
Sure. So I'm the general counsel at ServiceNow, and I've been here for 1.5 years. But prior to that, I've had a 20-year career in fintech, and I was in fintech before we called it fintech. So I started off in-house as a general counsel of E-Trade, and then I've done stints at Lending Club, which is a peer-to-peer lending opportunity, all financial, all technology based. And then I was at PayPal. So I've kind of done the rounds for a long time in fintech. And so obviously in fintech, as we talk about the cloud and we talk about its development, but when I was at E-Trade, on 9/11, and the world stopped. And the world stopped because literally the lines were cut when the World Trade Center fell. The lines were cut. E-Trade happened to have its data centers in Atlanta, and so therefore it was still able to operate when the rest of the world could not. That was kind of the first idea of the cloud that we kind of came to certainly know a lot better over the course of time, and how important it is to have dynamic data. And from in my entire career, data has become more important. Technology has become more important. Technology has, and in the financial services world, we've talked about how it can actually impact and change people's lives. So that's something that's been the core of what I've been doing, and I've been a user of technology for many, many years. When I was at PayPal, I came to know John Donahoe, who was the prior CEO. One of the things that most impressed me about John when I was there was his total commitment to culture, and the importance of culture, and the importance of, frankly, collaboration and cross-functional work. And it's something that as the lawyer, there's nothing more G&A than the lawyers who are kept in the back office, and people generally put them there because they want them there. But John had a dedication to bringing a whole team and a whole culture, and his kind of view was anybody, whether it be Lara or whether it be the CFO or whether it be the chief product officer, all are primarily business leaders who might have a function, they might have a substantive function that they primarily care for, but that all of us think about and care for the entire business. And we're business leaders making business decisions, helping lead the company as leaders. And that was super exciting to me when I worked with John at PayPal. Even more exciting because he became even more conscious of it and thoughtful about it here at ServiceNow. and has really brought kind of to ServiceNow a culture of collaboration, a culture of interdisciplinary interaction that is that not only translates to the way we do things as a company, but it also translates to how we're thinking about the product and how we're thinking about the development of the product. So, I am a member of the legal team, but also a member of the product development team. I'm also a member of the strategy team as we think about all of these things together. So this has been the most fun job I've ever had, and I believe that it will only become more fun working with people like Lara and people like Jordan. And so with that, although I own Jordan.
Thanks, Russ. No, you hit the nail on the head, and we've heard it a million times. When Ed talks about his experience at NASA, one of those luxuries, and just to emphasize that a little bit, and what we heard from Russ, a lot of that's mission and purpose driven, right? So there's a lot of real good mission and purpose behind each of those different functions, including cross-functionally, which I think really sets ServiceNow apart. NASA has the luxury that the clear mission of putting a human on Mars. Everybody rallies behind that. It's such a visible, tangible mission, but what do you do in an organization where things are happening digitally that you can't quite touch, that you can't quite feel, that you can't quite see in some cases in terms of how it's going? So I think that's really a new concept to emphasize. Real quick across the two of you, I know most of the people are probably familiar with ServiceNow, but as I know in helping Russ specifically engaging with the public sector and educating them on what it is, it's probably, as we and you've heard it a million times, the biggest company a lot of people haven't heard of in some respects, right? Can you guys give us a little bit, just a rundown, or Russ or Laura, whichever wants to start, on just kind of what ServiceNow does? And what I really like about it and the purpose and the mission is how you're making work better for people, which I think is really key in this current environment of not taking people to work, but we're bringing work to people, right? So just kind of curious on your perspective of what ServiceNow does and give people a little bit of a taste of that workflow world.
Sure. You want me to start, Russ?
Yeah, would you?
Yeah. So we were founded in 2004 as a cloud-based platform company. And the whole principle was to sort of allow everyday people to kind of create digital workflows for enterprises, meaning we help them transform old manual ways of working. And what was interesting was we were founded in a time kind of before platform companies were a thing. It's like a very normal thing now, and the notion of low code, no code, et cetera, in software. And what we found was actually, it's kind of hard to sell that because you have to be pretty creative to think about how that can be applied in a broad way across a company. And so we started building specific applications that basically allowed work to be digitized. And we started with this market, which is called ITSM, IT Service Management. And it's basically the simple concept of, work is requested, it gets routed through with certain rules, et cetera, gets automated and ends up getting resolved. Is a super generic way to describe what the platform does. And thankfully, from a business strategy perspective, we chose a market that had a bunch of kind of old, legacy players. And we became like the cloud option in that IT service management market, and quickly became the market share leaders in this market, which, our company's now bigger than what Gartner originally said the whole market was. So lessons about, what to believe about how much opportunity there are in certain spaces. But quickly, our customers actually started to realize then that original vision, which was this notion of digitizing work across the enterprise, and started using it for different use cases. So if you think about that, whether it's a person or machines sort of giving information or requesting something, creating some logic around it, routing that work through and resolving the problem, that use case can be applied in a lot of different areas. So we expanded into HR. So, you have an HR request, it gets kind of routed, et cetera, it gets resolved. It moved into customer service. So that notion of what gets done for IT internally can also be applied to customers. We brought it to security. And now there's all sorts of use cases that have that same notion of the platform. So, so truly, it is technology in service of people. And I think one of the misnomers about this kind of automation technology is that it, puts people out of jobs, and that's really not what we see. What we see is it allows the sort of mundane, daily repetitive tasks which make no one happy. It sort of allows that to be automated, and by the way, you then have audit trails, and you can you can comply with different rules, etc., and prove that to your various bodies. But also it allows you as a human to kind of not have to worry about that stuff anymore. So you can actually think of about the sort of higher creativity, more interesting tasks in your day. And so, so yes, we drive productivity and drive efficiency, etc. But I also think we make people's lives better.
Awesome. Yeah, absolutely. And so it's been fun for us working with ServiceNow. Russ, did you have anything you wanted to add to that real quick, or?
No, I think let's go with that. Sorry, I had to run out because there's sorry about that. Multitasking.
It's true, right? That what started as a root of IT service management, like Lara said, has really found out that most anything out there, oversimplifying obviously, but most anything out there that has an if-then statement associated with it can not only be automated, but digitally tracked, float around a company. When you're looking at a COVID environment like today, there's a lot of organizations and working with their public sector team on helping whole governments and whole agencies flip the switch and reroute work and adapt to half their workforce being shifted to remote on a moment's notice, and delivering benefits, working on unemployment systems overburdened that are overstressed, SNAP programs. We've done a number of those things. I can say firsthand, and it's really eye-opening, I think, for a lot of organizations to realize what it looks like to have an automated workflow system actually giving them the freedom to have that higher level of thinking, like Lara said, and creativity. That's fantastic. So that being said, that gives us a little bit of a taste of what ServiceNow is and does. I know you do this for a number of organizations, both on the commercial side and corporate side, public sector around the world. Before we get into some of those stories and examples, what does the future of work look like in ServiceNow? I mean, obviously it's probably changed. You've seen CEO shifts with Bill McDermott coming in. I'll probably argue, and Russ has heard me say this a number of times, probably arguably the most authentic leader I've been around or been exposed to. But as you go through what the future of work looked like maybe a year or two ago when you first came to ServiceNow, what does it look like today, and where do you see it going 3 to 5 years from now, for example?
Yeah, Russ, do you want to start?
Yeah, I'll start. So how do I see it? So John is an authentic leader, and actually that was what brought me to this company. What brought me to this company, actually, it's kind of funny, a couple of different things. First, it wasn't financial services, so like doing something other than financial services was fun. But also it was an industry that I hadn't been in before. I'd been a user of technology, but not in technology. And so it was going to have to be a change for me to figure out, if this was going to be the right choice for me. But John's commitment to culture was so consistent with what I had kind of had a vision of that a company could be. And I think he had worked, I think my perception of it, and Lara has been there for a year longer than I have, but I think even just in the time that I've been here, I've seen us move from kind of a hard driving technology company to more of it's almost a consumer feel to it, which I almost feel like consumer companies are becoming technology companies, and technology companies are having to speak to people like as a consumer. And we're kind of having the creation. I think there was a lot of discussion when I first got there about the consumer experience, and John Donahoe, our prior CEO, came from the consumer industry. He was the CEO of eBay. He went on to become the CEO of Nike. And so he had a very, very strong consumer background, but, and he wanted the experience to be more consumer. And I would say that Bill has taken that vision and said, take that consumer experience and recognize that work flows, that we do workflows, and work flows, and work has to flow across different parts of the business. And so it has to be able to flow across technology platforms, but also has to flow across departments. So the legal department has to work with the technology group, which has to work with the strategy group, which has to work with the CFO's offices, but it is all a workflow. And I think as the product has evolved, I think our culture has evolved too. I think Lara and I work very closely together, even probably more closely and in a different way, I think, than a traditional lawyer and strategy person works. Typically, the strategy person's out there thinking big thoughts. The lawyer doesn't understand the thoughts that she's thinking, but understands the deal that she's trying to do. Both of us understand each other's worlds, I think, a lot better. And I think that's been both a very conscious thing. That was a big thing for John. John was very much had been in culture and environments where he'd seen sort of silos build up and that create a negative sort of return for the whole organization. And he was very strong about tearing those bridges down. And he sort of built a team underneath him that also believes that very much. And so we do everything we can to tear down any kind of barriers, and we don't stand for them. We had a new person come on recently in a leadership position, coming from a different company, started talking about lawyers as, oh, we got to get those lawyers to change the way they do things. And the team as a whole said, no, that's not how we do things here, because we don't. And I see that from my perspective, but I think we are very conscious about trying to do that flow across the organization, recognizing that success only happens when we all work together towards a company.
Yeah, I like that. I think, and then sort of linking that back to the way people work, I think there's two parts of that. One is sort of related to technology and where that's going. And then I think there's a whole conversation we should have around COVID and the impact of work on, because of that. But Russ, to your point about how culture kind of influences your products, et cetera, I think fundamentally software has opinions. It's built with default settings that then become, how work is done, right? And of course it's flexible and companies can change it and whatever, but truly it does have opinions, kind of definitionally, as you set it up and configure it, et cetera. And I think that what differentiates ServiceNow as a platform relates back to what Russ was saying about our own culture. So, think about, I'll give you some use cases because it helps me think in use cases a little bit, but think about, onboarding as a process that every human goes through when they start a job or when you bring on a customer or whatever. What you have, like a traditional onboarding process is quite painful because you're dealing with all of these different functions that you have to figure out. You have to get a seat and you have to, sign legal documents and you have to deal with payroll and you have to, fill out a bunch of HR forms and, you have to onboard with your own function, and so there's all these different processes and different functions and different sets of data, et cetera. And oftentimes you're filling in the same data over and over for different forms that go to different departments. Well, if you think about, no, it shouldn't be like that. We should make this a lot simpler because it's consumer grade, because that's what people expect. By the way, the people that we are hiring today were born with an iPad, and my kids, born with an iPad in their hands. They are truly digitally native. That is the experience they expect. That one swipe, one click world is what they expect. And, that's how they interact with, how they communicate with their friends. That's how you buy things. That's how you get around in the world, and that's what we expect at work now too. And so this notion that it's going to be okay for the future workforce to have to deal with repeating the same form 15 times and doing it all on paper. And then, it's like when you're in a call center queue and you have to say all your information up front and then you have to say it again when the person answers the phone. It's like the most infuriating thing in the world. That is not a good consumer grade experience. And so this notion of really putting consumer grade experience in the front end, which by the way is mobile, which is one click, which leverages the technology of your phone with your thumbprint or your face or whatever. And then taking away all that complexity on the back end and not putting that in front, but creating a workflow that truly is cross-functional, leveraging data in a repeated way, in a smart way, et cetera. That's what ServiceNow can do. And there's a bunch of other use cases where that applies. But I think it very much links back to what Russ was saying, which is that notion of what we're doing and what we believe work should look like is also how we experience our own culture internally in the company.
Perfect. Who's ready to sign up? I think Ed's ready to sign up.
Ready to sign up.
But that makes perfect sense, right? And so I think one of these things, and that's why I was so happy to have Russ and Laura on here, we talked about illustrating some of the things we cover in the course, is really around, everybody often hears the generality and the platitude that the tools and the tech have to complement the people. They have to focus on the people. They have to enhance the people. That sounds great, but when it comes to me from a Navy background, and with some of our Army folks and the military folks, we constantly always have to operationalize these things. And what does that look like? And Laura hit a key point, right? The software has an opinion, and Russ hit a key point that it broke down the silos. It's focusing on enhancing the work that people are doing. From ServiceNow specifically. And I think that's being reflected in the product, which I think is something that's unique in that sense, that cultural aspect, those values of the organization and what they focus on is actually inherently reflected in the product and out to the customers, regardless of where those might be. So I think that's key. What about knowledge in the organization? In terms of, we have a bunch of very practical knowledge managers in this crowd, right? How do you coalesce a group around a new idea? How do you put past practices out to pasture? We talked about the concept of unlearning with the course. Barry O'Reilly, who's actually based out in the Silicon Valley, is written quite a bit around what's made organizations successful to date may not be what they need to be successful in the next 3 to 5, 10 years as you look at goals and objectives of getting the $10 billion at ServiceNow. What do you see doing differently? And how do you see that kind of knowledge function from an intangible sense impacting how you work as leaders?
You want to start, Russ?
You start, Laura. I'll jump in.
Well, I mean, I think that's kind of the idea of like unlearning and thinking about what we need to do. So I'll just apply it to the notion of the technology that we have, right? And part of what happens with a lot of knowledge work in general is it tends to be a lot of what's in people's heads. And so it's the messiest work that happens in a company because none of it tends to be documented and you end up with, certain experts, et cetera. I think that part of what COVID has done and in general, what, our software and what trends are doing is, that's very dangerous. There's like a lot of single points of failure in a company when that happens, right? And a global pandemic that can take out an individual for an extended period of time it starts to become an actual liability to the company. So you have this like human resiliency issue that you have to deal with. And so being able to identify, okay, what are those things that we do that are in people's heads, et cetera? What should we actually document? What can we actually automate? What do we need to put in a workflow? And the idea of starting to actually document, write things down, think about them, then also I think creates that notion of like, wait a second, why the hell do we do it that way? Like, that's a silly step. Why don't we rethink that? Why don't we unlearn that? I think it creates all these opportunities to then say, okay, wow, I never thought about it that way. I never looked at it that way, et cetera. Which I think also links to this notion of like having multiple people look at the problem, especially if they have diversity of thought and they're a diverse team, creates a better solution. So I think all these things kind of coalesce around this notion that, there is this role for kind of documentation, for writing it down, et cetera, especially in that kind of knowledge worker space.
That seems to strike quite a bit on the experience piece, Russ. I know you're going to jump in there, but that's the transparency, I think, and the visibility of how that flows in the organization. So I think that's the technology, again, enhancing that quite a bit, I think, right?
Yes. I'd also think I will say to the topic of unlearning, I think one of the things that ServiceNow has done well that I've observed is kind of make it safe to have new ideas and make it safe to change. And I think one of the things, and safe means almost literally safe, because I've been in companies, particularly like coming from financial services, like I am the mutual fund 1% fee dude. And if you change that product, I'm actually out of a job. And I think one of the things we've tried to do here, I think that cross-functional insistence on not being siloed, being business leaders, not just subject matter experts, helps us and makes it a little bit easier. I mean, we have a recent example where we were working really hard on a product. We thought it was going to be great. We thought we were going to go to market and it was going to be wonderful. And kind of came to learn that, it wasn't so wonderful. And we were able to, I think, sort of move away from it quickly, actually, frankly, more quickly than any, and more positively than any company that I've ever been at. And I think it was because people were cross-functionally trained enough that they were able to agile, like nobody actually lost their job because of it. People were able to move from one product to another and actually were able to embrace the change. And I think because it was safe for people to make those kinds of, that if you made those kinds of decisions or if you made a bold choice, there wasn't actually a potentially a consequence to your livelihood, which I think can be real. And I think, I mean, like, obviously it's real if you feel like if I make a change, I'm going to lose my job. But it's real in that, if you're not free to make those changes, things will get ossified.
Yeah, which I think also speaks to like a very customer-centric culture, which ultimately is super important, because you always have to have, customer centricity has to be at the start of what you do. And so as long as you're thinking about what's best for the customer, that should translate to what's best for the company. And so I do find that kind of true north, that guiding light, tends to put aside some of those conversations which are a little bit protect my own patch. And it's like, well, no, actually, I get, like, this is hard for me. This transfers revenue from my BU to your BU or whatever, but I get why that's the right thing to do for the company and for the customer, which I think is another factor in kind of what you're talking about, which creates the right kind of behaviors.
That customer focus, I think, Bill McDermott is a true leader in the software industry. He's a legend, but he's also very simple in his message. Like, he tells his story about how he began in business running a deli, and he was the cool place to run the deli because he understood what the customers wanted, and that the kids wanted to be able to hang out and play video games. And so he set up a video arcade at his place, and that brought the customer in because that's what the customer wanted. And he's brought that same mentality to everything he's done. He's brought it to ServiceNow tremendously well. And so we are always thinking and talking about the customer experience, and is the customer happy, and that really singular focus on customer allows Bill, frankly, to go deep in a conversation with the CEO about what the CEO needs and bring that back to the team. And he's also able to kind of call when we're not being customer centric, and he'll call that out very, very clearly. And when you demand customer centricity, but also have safety to be able to make bold choices, that creates a winning environment. Now, this company is young, and so it's the risk to this company is that as it grows and as it becomes older, and people have been there for 15 years, that spirit of innovation, that spirit of change, and that safety in making bold decisions could get lost. And I think we all have to be very conscious of every day.
You're really stimulating for me a lot of questions, and I know we want to go to the audience in a few minutes, but I was going to ask you about Russ, you had started by saying it's the most fun place to work, and I resonated with that. And immediately after that, Lara, you had talked about it makes people's lives better. And to me, that gets at the culture issue, but it also gets at the leadership issue. And that's not normal for most organizations that I see. How does this happen at ServiceNow? You've talked about some of those examples. What makes it, fun? Is it the great efficiency? Is it the collaboration? Is it the fact that they like lawyers? Is it, what is it that creates that culture that can be replicated?
Yeah. Well, my perspective on it, and Russ, I'm sure you have your own. Like, I think it's two things. I think first is aligning on a common purpose, and I think that's super, super important for people are spending their precious time away from their families and their loved ones working on something, 9 to 5 and often longer every, 5 days a week. And you have to believe that you are truly making a difference. And the best way to make a difference is to let people do that in a way that is aligned towards the same goal. And so I think John actually did this very beautifully, where he understood the importance of purpose. By the way, I think I talked about kind of generational importance. Like, I think this is even more important. Like doing good in the world, making a difference is even more important to the next generation of employees. And so aligning on a purpose that matters, this notion of making the world of work better for people, which makes statements about what work is going to be, the role of software in the world, what we actually do for people, and then aligning that with your messaging, et cetera. All of that is one really important part. And I think we've done that quite well, and we've been very consistent with that. And then I think culture is the other piece of that, which should reinforce your purpose, and that also has what makes your company unique, right? And so one of our cultural values, we've talked about being customer centric, we've talked about having fun, etc. One of them is to be hungry and humble, and this idea, which I think is probably my favorite of our cultural values, and this notion that, like, hey, we're working hard, but nobody's like, there's no smartest person in the room here. Like, we're all in this to get better, to learn, to work together, etc. We're open to new, we have a growth mindset. So I think for me, it's the notion of, like, we make a difference. And also we have a great culture. And part of having a great culture is, you got to stay hungry and humble. Yeah. And part of making a great culture is also this notion of, diversity, inclusion, and belonging, which is one of our cultural values, and belonging and feeling like you can truly be your unique self and bring your best self to work is another part of it. So for me, it's a special sauce of these cultural elements plus an aligned purpose that make it great. And I think a lot of people feel that way.
And Russ, being the true customer centrist he is, he's on brand. Look at that.
Yeah,
right. So, what I would say is, so I've been at a lot of different companies in fintech, and I've been in a lot of San Francisco companies from big to small. And here's what I will tell you: fun is not. Fun is not putting a ping pong table in the break room. Fun is not putting a putting green someplace. Fun is that, because actually some of the worst cultures I've been at have tried the hardest to sort of divert people's attention with toys. But what fun is, I mean, for me, fun is having a purpose, but is also like having a stimulating, like every day is stimulating to me. Every day, all day is stimulating to me. And that's fun because I'm learning. So I'm always learning at this company, and we are always making ourselves learn at this company, and we challenge ourselves in those ways. And the purpose, John Donahoe and Bill also, each in slightly different ways, talked about being a purpose-driven company. And our purpose is stated as, we make the world of work better for people, which is that's great, but those words on itself, and if you think about, making work easier, doesn't feel that like an inspiring mission. But when you see how it's applied in so many different ways, it's actually stunningly inspiring. So, we're working with Jordan on the ability to make work flow across unemployment insurance systems that are old and antiquated, and being able to get state systems to talk to federal systems as a workflow that actually will help people get money faster, or answer their questions about the most important thing in their lives right now is being able to afford the rent. Like those things, when you realize that is the kind of work that you're doing, or whether it's getting the right equipment in a hospital to the right place at the right time so that someone can get the care that they need at the time that they need it. When you think about that purpose of making the world of work better for people actually becomes much more vibrant, compelling, and sort of really important. Human.
And that's what I was going to ask you before we go into asking, for some Q&A from the audience, is just, is there any one thing that sticks out in either of your minds, whether it's the public sector, the private sector type customers? Russ hit on one, nationally, helping improve an entire national benefits system, amidst a pandemic and a crisis, right? I mean, pretty inspiring stuff. And it's amazing to see the team and how they're changing the way they work. And Russ and I have been commenting on that. Or Laura, is there any one specific instance that you've seen where ServiceNow's had an impact? You've been like, wow, like I didn't even caught you off.
I mean, there's like so many stories. One that I love is, a little bit, Russ was alluding to the use case, but, it was a hospital in Australia that was dealing with patients that were immobile that had, I think, spine injuries, right, Russ, or something. Yep. And they partnered with, with Amazon. So it was like using Alexa in the hospital rooms, so the patients could ask Alexa and tell Alexa what they needed, and then that was able to then route the work. Oh, they need clean bed sheets, or no, they're having a medical, they fell out of bed, or it allowed that to then the nurse didn't have to go in and just respond to a call every time. You could actually, oh no, this is an emergency, we need a doctor now, or no, we just actually need a facilities technician to clean somebody up, or no, we need a nurse to go triage something. So it really
I just need my Jello.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, or no, I just need Jello. So and that question, right. And the nurse never even sees that I need Jello. It goes to the cafeteria, and the cafeteria brings it up.
Right.
And so the nurse can focus on the need, the medical need.
Right. Yeah. Or in COVID, there's lots of cool examples that have been used. There's a hospital system that basically, as you might imagine, the nurse helpline was completely overwhelmed with people trying to figure out, like, oh my God, do I have this thing? What are my symptoms? Can I get tested? Whatever. And they, in 4 days time, they leveraged ServiceNow and the platform. They created kind of a front end that helped to, triage the calls, sort of get people the information that they needed automatically, so that the actual calls for the nurses were reduced 90%. So that, only nurses only had to deal with the calls that only a nurse could had to deal with. And so people actually got answers to their questions much more quickly and efficiently in a time that was, incredibly scary for everybody.
Fantastic. So, I mean, I think we heard the tangible measurements, time to market, right? We talked about that. A lot of that's driven by decision-making, right? And like we heard from Laura and Russ, putting the intangible focus of customer centricity at the center of that, right? Helping guide those decisions, making those quicker, knowledge and learning, right? We covered that a little bit in terms of the unlearn concept, the safety of making some bold ideas and decisions, using that customer-centric focus as well too, tying together. And the third bucket, Ed and I have tried to put some measurement around, and the research we've been doing is around culture, right? And I think the ultimate enabler across those, when we break those down to their fundamental ingredients, is trust and collaboration. And I think we've heard a theme of that across everything Russ and Laura have talked about quite a bit. So I think those kind of hit the three buckets we're hoping to, kind of illustrate that you hear about quite a bit in what we see as the future of work, right? Leaders adapting and harnessing those values are going to drive value in their organization through those vehicles specifically.
So Jordan, I know you're going to get now to the audience
questions. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Did you want to go ahead, Ed, or go ahead?
Yeah, I was going to add, I mean, one of the questions we had at the beginning, and I wanted to make sure we'll go through the chats. Yeah. So a couple of things. If you want to ask a question, put it in the chat now. If you want to verbalize it, maybe raise hand so we can go around. But to get it started, there was a question early on about the notion of authentic leadership. And the question was around, how do you define authentic leadership? What does it look like? And any responses to that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll go, and Russ, you can jump in. I think what's been really striking is over this period of my just 2.5 years, and Russ just a year and a half at the company, we've had two CEOs that could not be more different for personality-wise. They are just very, very different people, both exceedingly great leaders and great CEOs, but very, very different. And what's so wonderful as a lesson for me about that, that I take in my own notion of leadership is there's not one there's not one definition, there's not one formula for successful leadership in this company or in the world, and that we all have different strengths. And what's wonderful about both of them is that it's very true to who they are. It's there, no one's pretending to be someone that they aren't. Literally, like I saw in the chat, we referenced Bill's book. Like you listen to his book, and on audiobook it's actually even cooler because it's actually him reading it.
Wow.
And it is literally who he is. I mean, it is just, it is absolutely 100% consistent in the public, behind closed doors, who he is. It is just, it is absolutely true. And I think, and John was very much like that as well. And so for me, the strength of you know, the beauty in seeing that was like, okay, I can see these two things that I can aspire to be like, that I really like, and these three things with this other person. But it's all, you know, what works best for me, and because of who I am. And I think we all have our different, you know, strengths that fundamentally can create styles of leadership that really work. And I think people can see through, if you're not authentic to who you are, I think people can smell it a mile away. And so that notion of belonging, I think indeed helps you be an authentic leader, gives you confidence in like, hey, who I am is great, and people respect it, and I can actually be the best version of me because I feel completely comfortable sharing who I am, you know, and that to me is authentic leadership, and I think I see that in the leaders at ServiceNow.
Well, I've been through a lot of different CEOs, many more than probably Lara, who's had a much more stable career than me. But I will tell you that you can smell someone who's faking it from a long way away. And there are the tangible things that come out of that. And I under John's leadership and Bill's leadership, and frankly with Pat Waters, who's our head of global talent, she pushes hard to make people be authentic and be vulnerable. And that there are actual tangible things that come out of that, which is, I trust that when Bill says something to me, he means it. Or that when John said something to me, he means it. And we've kind of embedded that in ourselves. So when Lara says something to me, I know that she means it. Sometimes she uses bad language. Actually she does a lot. But that's part of who she is, and so that I know when she tells me that she believes it. The more important thing about it is that therefore I trust what she tells me. I trust that what she's telling me is true. And what I have found as being more vulnerable is that people tell me things, people are more comfortable telling me things, and they don't try to hide stuff from me. And so they're like, if I'm authentic and vulnerable, and people understand when I screw up, they're more likely to tell me when they screw up, which actually lets us fix a problem before it becomes too big to deal with.
Yeah. And I can attest to it. Just in the short time I've been working with Russ, and Russ, you've only been there for just over a year.
Not in the short time, he's screwed up so many times.
But what's really amazing, like my background, and Ed and I've talked about this, being a submariner myself, right? It's a small group of folks. You're responsible for each other. If you don't do it as a leader or at any level in that organization, the boat doesn't float on its own. You got to make it work, right, as a group. And if you don't do it, somebody else has to. In the short period of time, it's amazing. Russ, he's been familiarizing me with the rest of the ServiceNow team that we've been working with. He knows what these people want to do, what they want to accomplish in just a short period of time. No, his aspirations and goals are X. He wants to be over here with Y. So let's try to find a way to help him with that. And I was really impressed in just such a short period of time. He had just right off the top of his head, almost a Rolodex of where his troops wanted to be in the near term already. And that was really impressive. So that would be another example of authentic leadership, I think, that would help. Ed, did you have something else in the chat? Yeah, go ahead.
Plays out really nicely. You can see example. You're able to be yourself.
Comfortable in your own skin.
That's one of the things Jordan would come home since he's worked. He always tells me I'm able to be myself, and so it's a good thing. There's also a question in the chat there from Brett, which I think lines up to this notion of authenticity and what you had spoke about earlier about there's an expectation in the new generation of doing things the right way and improving things. And so Brett is asking, what values change in the future of work, or are the values defined similarly but executed differently? So have the values changed, do you think, in the future of work as we go forward? Or are they maybe still universal values that are just being executed differently?
Lara, what do you think?
Well, I think generationally things sort of things appropriately change, but I think there are a set of core values that do the right thing is a core value that, I think stays true, but the notion of how that's interpreted probably is different, right? I think we see in, even in frankly, the very honest and raw conversation and painful conversations we've had about race, right? Over the past several months, that's a different conversation that we're having at work about that than people had 10 years ago, and probably than we even had 1 year ago. And will that conversation be even different 5 years from now? I hope so. I actually hope the expectations have evolved in such a way that we expect even more. And so that's, I think, a notion of just how naturally values do evolve as sort of society evolves. And so I think that's probably healthy and appropriate,
Yeah. Perfect. And that's part of that authenticity, obviously, the ability to be real, to be ourselves, and then to contribute that.
There's one more in there, and while I know we did put a focus on the intangibles, and I didn't give the full background to everybody, like I said, there's a number of quantifiable research items out there that shows 85% of the S&P 500 over the last 4 years have been based on intangibles. They're the value drivers in the organizations. There's a good question here. While we've talked about a lot of softer side culture aspects, values, principles, mission, purpose, etc., have to be realistic, right? I mean, ServiceNow has, Russ, I've seen you grinding your teeth through investor relations prep, and we have quarterly forecasts, and we have KPIs and metrics, and it is a publicly traded company, so there is some rooted reality in those aspects. How do you translate the mission-driven vision and values of the organization and balance that across short-term, long-term, the actual KPIs and OKRs and objectives in the organization? Is that something that is a difficult thing to do, or does it naturally happen, or what's your perspective on goals?
I would say no, it's not difficult. No, it doesn't naturally happen. You have to make it happen. And I think, this has been a company that more than any other company, like when I first got here, it's kind of funny, I got here on the Monday, I started on the Monday after Thanksgiving. And the next week, everybody on the team was supposed to kind of draft what their goals were for the next year. And I said, okay, well, I'm sure that applies to everybody but me, but it applied to me too. But 10 days later, I found that I was actually able to write what my goals were going to be for the next year easier than I ever had before, tangible KPI kinds of goals, because it was clear what we had to do. It was clear where we were going. And so therefore it was clear what we had to do to get there. And so it became quite easy to make those goals happen. And then one of the other things that I think has been unique for me, because I have had a rich history of going through goal setting exercises, which were really great. And then we finished them and we put the goals away. And then the next year we did the same thing and had no recollection of what we had agreed to the year before. But we, on a quarterly basis, kind of hold ourselves accountable to reading out how we are doing against those goals that we wrote down that we said we were going to do. We take our annual goals and we quarterize them. We read out to each other how we did every quarter on those goals. And then under Lara's terrific leadership, we also have a 3-year plan, so where we look out big and we think big, like where should we be going and where should we be headed? And we revisit that 3-year outlook on a regular basis to see what's changed in the landscape, what's changed in what we're doing. And by taking that long-term vision, you can bring it to an annual vision, taking that annual vision, bringing it to a quarterly vision, and they're real. But you can see how they fit, because we also have to make that connection up and down, but they're very tangible. Like this is the most also, as much as we're a purpose-driven, mission-driven, touchy-feely company where we used to be able to hug each other all the time, we're also one that holds ourselves accountable to very specific tangibles. And, how do we measure success for ourselves? Well, frankly, we measure our success for ourselves by what is the net new annual contract value that we're getting. It's very tangible. Like, what is the revenue? How is the product resonating in the market? What are our customer NPS scores?
Yeah, I think that's right. Like, obviously, we're a publicly traded company. We have to do that. We have commitments to the street and our shareholders, and we have to do that. The way I think about strategy for a software company is like, look, you have product. You have to think about what the product strategy needs to be, and you have to think about your go-to-market strategy and how that needs to evolve. And then you need to think about the org, and a lot of this softer stuff fits into that. And honestly, you could have the best product strategy, the best go-to-market in the world. If you don't think about, as you scale, all of these softer things that we're talking about, you will fail, because the bureaucracy, the culture, like all of those things will weigh you down and slow you down as a company. And so I think all these things really needing to kind of gears that need to move in tandem to be able to deliver the excellent operating results that you see.
We're getting close to the top of the hour. Do you want to try to get one more in, Ed, real quick? Or?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I'm thinking, is there a question that you would like to answer Lara and Russ, that what would you like to be asked?
Lara, have you got one?
Really? I mean, I just want to be useful to you guys.
Yeah. I guess I would say, for what you guys are talking about and what you're thinking about, so I've been in business for 30 years. And over the course of that time, I think I have seen a real change in this culture, this concept of culture being something talked about but turning it into something real. And I think sort of the world and what you guys are doing here in programs like this, and what we're trying to make alive in our companies, is that sort of those lofty words that we talk about, culture and customer orientation, they actually are really quite commonsensical. And when you actually just focus on them and do the work, it's actually a ton of work to actually do it. Creating a good culture means showing up, answering questions, being where you're supposed to be when you're supposed to be there. And that's not easy. And it's a lot of work. But when you do it, those simple things, they pay off like more than you can ever imagine. So I don't know that I answered a question other than, but I did spew a philosophy.
No, philosophy is good here. It's Columbia University.
Yeah.
In the chat, there are several questions, I think, that are all good. So I don't know if you wanted to scan any of those. We have a question of, our younger staff. It sounds like your organization is young, but are they able to have the influence to develop goals, as well as those who've been working for many years? So is this the ability to influence really kind of democratic throughout all the people who work at your levels, from what you say?
I mean, I think so. I think it's and I think that, again, this comes down to culture and the belief in diversity of thought, and the belief that more brains on a problem gets us to a better answer, and that there is no such thing as the smartest person in the room. And so I think that starts from how you model it from the top. And I think what's super interesting is on our executive team, I don't actually think there's a hierarchy of power. There are people that have, bigger organizations, et cetera, but we have equal voices, and we contribute really quite equally. And so in that way, I think we model that for the company, and we model that in our own staffs, which I think translates down. And also you see it in like who our leaders are. It's not all, old white straight men. You know, there's a mix of people in leadership roles that represent different backgrounds and different levels of experience. And I think that's also important for people to look up and see that ahead of them.
You know, I think I would also say when you're trying to create a consumer grade experience, you almost have to talk to the younger people because they're the ones who know it better. It's funny, we used to laugh when I was at PayPal. PayPal owns Venmo. So, you know, I Venmo you, but if you're over 40, you don't have a Venmo account. And so we used to talk about that we had to bring in the young people because we didn't understand what the product did. And who the heck would send money and then post to everyone on the world what they spent their money on? But those are that bottom up kind of concept of that idea, like the Venmo was an idea. And we've got similar stories at ServiceNow of things that come from bottom up that actually take on a life of their own and actually become the driving force of the next generation of the business. That if you were listening to the Bain consultant who was going to tell you what the next big trend was, you would have completely missed it.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. Well, I think we're at the top of the hour. Ed, did you want to factor in one more, or do you want to?
I'm always ready for one more. Do we have energy for one more?
Energy for one
Yeah,
more?
I'm seeing thumbs up.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Before we lose Russ and Lara?
Absolutely. I guess one of the questions, I don't know if there's something that you want to go towards. What I'm wondering about is, what are the capabilities you're looking for, you know, to work at a modern firm like ServiceNow? You're talking about digital, you're talking about technology, you're talking about efficiencies, you're certainly talking about team and culture, but are there certain things you look for when you're bringing on people like from this crowd?
You want to
I
start,
think,
Rob?
yeah, I think agility and agility, smartness, which is a new word that I just made up, smarticity, but also an ability to understand and fit in with the culture, and a diversity of thought and ideas. I think we challenge ourselves to look for people who are going to think differently than how we think, and that's a lot of discipline to be able to do that, because it's easy to tap your network, talk to who you used to know. You know, so-and-so did such a great job at my last company that they must be able to do a great job here, and sometimes they will and sometimes they won't. And so I think it's agility, energy, and what Bill McDermott always says, which is actually I found to be very true: who wants the job the most? Like the one who wants the job might not be the one who on paper seems to be the most qualified, but looks so bored with the interview, versus the one who might not look quite, you know, might not come from the most prestigious university, might not come from the most prestigious whatever last job, but who is hungry for this job, is usually the one who's going to do the best.
So you want people who stay hungry and humble. It sounds
Hungry
like.
and humble.
I really do.
That's right.
Smagility, as Joe coined.
Smagility.
Yeah.
The other thing I would add, which goes back to what Russ was talking about earlier, we have this notion of working east-west, which is like, we don't want to have to raise issues north-south and like have Bill be the arbiter of the problems. We want to be able to work east-west and figure things out on our own and work collaboratively. And so that notion of like, who are the people who are going to be able to get in a room and work with peers from different parts of the organization and get, work through hard problems and get stuff done and figure out the solution. That skill set is incredibly important.
That's great. Well, you've already given Jordan and I new terms for the upcoming syllabus. We'll have smarticity and learning.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's cool.
Just don't ask us to academically back those up in any way, shape. So that's good. Well, I think we're getting close to the top of the hour. Like I said, we're a little bit over now. But yeah, Brett, questions about veterans. I mean, I can tell you, working with the ServiceNow team, I've been helping their team engage with the Veterans Administration. And when I spoke to some of the leadership, it makes it easy when the entire engagement team from ServiceNow, a handful of 5 or 6 professionals, it's a combat Marine, a wounded warrior from the Army, 2 other airborne guys, 82nd and 101st, you talk about customer centricity. They are customers of the VA trying to help the system run better. So, I mean, the diversity of folks I've come across in a short period of time there's been really impressive. So it's been great, I think, and really emphasize that. I want to thank Laura and Russ for taking the time this evening. We're going to hope to keep them involved. I did tell Laura to start, kind of racking her brain specifically around the strategy side of the organization. So hopefully for our navigating the future of work, maybe, not to put too much pressure on her, but maybe we can come up with a not too proprietary problem, but like she said, getting enough minds on it, maybe we can come up with some sort of a capstone type project and allow folks to kind of sink their teeth into the world of digital workflows and how all of this ties together into solving problems for organizations. All right.
Yes, thank you so much. I know if we were in a room together, you'd hear the applause and you'd see the applause, but engaging, really engaging.
We canceled the confetti and balloons. We apologize. But we really appreciate it, guys. Thanks for taking the time tonight. And Beth or Ed, is there anything else you wanted to add to close out with the group?
Thank you so much for joining us. This is wonderful. So interesting.
Also thanks to obviously to the our students and alumni, and welcome and thank you to the guests. And hopefully if you heard good things, stay in touch with us.
Yep, and I encourage you to follow ServiceNow on social media. They've got some amazing stuff they put out there. Zoom, like we said, we're on a Zoom platform here between them partnering with Zoom now most recently. They're looking at any way they can to change the world of work. So as you're looking at that issue, they're a good data stream to keep tabs on because there's quite a bit changing and they're usually at the tip of the spear on that. All right. So congratulations. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. You made it.
Thank you very much for having us.
Yeah.
Thanks so much. We'll talk to you everybody soon. Have a great night.
Bye.